friends, welcome back to another monthly reading recap video, and today I am going to be going through all of the books that I read in the month of August, and there are a lot of them. I think I read a total of 12 books in August, so it was a really good reading month for me, and I am going to rapid fire my way through all of these books and give you my thoughts, reviews, and ratings for them. Started the month off strong with a big book. This is A Soul of Ash and Blood. This is a continuation in the From Blood and Ash series, which I read in the beginning of the year. So this takes place after the events of the fourth book. However, it is from Castile, the main male character's perspective, and we kind of have a first couple of few chapters continuing on from the fourth book, but then we get basically his whole perspective that takes place during the first book. So it's kind of going back to the plots of the first book, but from the MMC's perspective, which was really fun. I did find it a little bit hard to get back into this just because it was kind of going over through, you know, a story that I already knew, since we were going over the story of the first book, but just in his perspective. So I kind of already knew what was happening, but there were lots of really good bits of gold in this that contributed to the plot and really made me understand his character a bit more. So I did really like this, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read is called Pussy, A Reclamation. Now this one is by Regina Thomasure, but I know her better as Mama Gina. Now Mama Gina is a really, really big woman in the space of not just women empowerment, but women's sexuality and women's divine spiritual essence, if you can call it that. But basically just like a really spiritual, sexual person. So I think she's a sexologist, and she does a lot of work with a lot of other people I really look up to in that profession and in that industry. And this was a great book. This is the second time I've read this book. This was just kind of a refresher. Basically this book is just about taking back ownership and the power of your pussy, your vagina, and just everything that comes with being feminine and a woman. And I just really enjoyed it, and I really needed a nice recap of it. But if you're a woman, I highly recommend checking this book out. And again, 5 stars for me. It was 5 stars the first time I read it, and it was 5 stars on the reread. Then continuing on that pattern of that women's sexuality, I read this little mini book called Sex Without Pain by Heather Jeffcoat. This wasn't what I was expecting it to be. I thought it was going to be a little bit more analytical and a little bit more spiritual, but it was generally just kind of like a how-to guide with like pictures and diagrams and like opening up your hips and stretching your hips, things like that, which weren't really problems that were relevant to me. I thought it was going to touch more on the psychological side of sexual trauma, but it was just much more of the physical side. So didn't really rate this one too highly. I gave it a 3 out of 5 just because it wasn't really that relevant to me, but I could see how it would be relevant to other people. Then I read Women Don't Owe You Pretty by Florence Given, and this is actually a book I've had on my shelf for 2.5 years now, and I've heard really good things about it from everyone I know, and I was really keen to read it. I thought it was going to really touch base on some new ideas around women empowerment and feminism, and I was kind of let down a little bit. I felt like it was very pushy, and I felt like it was very preachy, and there's definitely been a time in the past where I was very preachy myself in terms of feminism, women's rights, and sticking up for yourself, enforcing your boundaries, etc. And I still am in a way. I just don't like to be kind of like yelled at in that approach. I want to know how we can solve the problem and actually fix these issues rather than just being told what the problem is over and over again. And that's just kind of how I felt this book was. It was just a little bit too in your face and pushy for my liking, and that's why I gave it a 2 out of 5. Next up is The Beauty Guide by Dr. Libby Weaver, and this is more of a science health kind of book. Lots of diagrams here, but just a lot of science and evidence and facts just around, like, you know, women's health, hormones coming off of the birth control pill, which is very relevant to me at the moment. So this was just a nice little refresh of a lot of knowledge that I already have, and just different things that I could apply to my own health life. Back into fantasy, I read the Cruel Prince trilogy from Holly Black. I have seen this everywhere. I have seen this all over my my BookTok, as in my TikTok account, with all the book content that I see on there. And I've seen people absolutely rave about it. It's YA, so it's young adult, so it's not too smutty. Actually, there's not really any smut in it at all. It's very much kind of fade to black kind of smut scenes if you're into that. But I actually loved this book. It's a short read. This only took me a day, which is really nice and refreshing, but I just really liked the FMC, the female main character, and the main character. He was very broody and odd and kind of that enemies to lovers vibe, which I always love. And I felt like the author did a really good job of kind of getting me hooked from the get-go. So I won't dive too much into what it's about, but absolutely loved it. Set in a Fey world where everyone It's set in a fairy world, and the main male character also has a tail, so that was interesting. So I gave first book 5 out of 5. Second in the Cruel Prince trilogy was The Wicked King. Loved the plot twist in this, did not expect it. I gave this book a 4 out of 5. Next up, Queen of Nothing, which is the conclusion to the Cruel Prince trilogy. And I loved it. I loved the way she decided to end the book. I loved that our main female character still had power at the end. She didn't lose any powers or things like that, which is a nice, refreshing break from a lot of fantasy books. And I gave it a 4 out of 5. Then I discovered that there's a little extra to the Cruel Prince world, and it's called How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories. So this is obviously about Carden, who is our lead male character in the Cruel Prince trilogies, and it's basically just a bunch of short sort of stories explaining his character, and you just get a lot of more insight into his childhood, what happened to him, and why he thinks the way he does. So I really enjoyed that, and I gave it a 4 out of 5. Next up, we have You Are a Goddess. Now, this is by Sophie Bashford, and I loved this. This was just a nice little refresher on a lot of the spirituality work that I'm already doing. I already listened to a lot of people in this field in terms of just spirituality, and then also women's spirituality, and that goddess sort of energy. And I loved this book, and it just really touched base and kind of gave me a few more different goddesses that I could tap into throughout my own spiritual practices. So 5 out of 5 for this one. Then we got to my favorite book of the month, which is Divine Rivals. This is one of my favorite books I've read of the whole year. I loved this book, and I didn't think that I was going to love it so much, because it's technically fantasy, but it's not, set in a magical world with people having powers and magic and things like that. It's just a kind of a normal story. It's set in a war, set during a war, and it's between two colleagues. They both work for the same paper. They're both writers, and they get separated, and they have these typewriters that they can type with each other. Now, she doesn't know that it's him that she's typing with, but he knows it's her, and she hates him, and it's just, the whole enemies to love a bit. And I loved it, and I loved every character. I loved every second. I just felt the author did a really good job of fleshing out the characters and their development and making you fall in love with them. And I cannot wait for book 2, because it was left on such a big cliffhanger. But this was a 5 out of 5 for me. The last book I read in August was The Silent Patient. Now, this is very much out of my normal genre. This is a crime thriller. And this was a page turner. I devoured this in about a day and a half. It's in first person as well, and I just did not expect the twist at the end. And I know everyone probably says that about any crime book that they read, that there's obviously a massive twist, but I genuinely did not see the twist coming, and I was left there with my jaw hanging wide open at the end, because I just could not believe that that's actually what had happened and that's who it was. And I just found it fascinating. So another 5 out of 5 read for me for The Silent Patient. So that's all the books that I read during the month of August. Obviously, it was a great reading month. 12 books, so that's taken me a lot closer to my reading goal for the year. But yeah, so those are my quick little rapid fire reviews of the books that I read in August.